The red lantern at Ash Mesa. The first time the bell moved on its rope without a hand upon it, the wind was not blowing. It was a still night that pressed the dust flat and made coyotes swallow their voices. Over the flats, a single red lantern burned where no lantern should be, high on the black shelf of Ash Mesa, steady as a star that had lost its place. Horses in the corral leaned to the far rails and would not face that glow. In the clinic window, a lamp burned low, and behind it a figure stitched a tear in a blanket and listened to a sound that was not yet a sound. The way one listens for rain in a sky that is not ready to admit anything. All that week the creek ran wrong. It carried the taste of iron and old pennies and something else that made people drink with the pinch of nose that belongs to sick rooms. Chickens refused water. A steer stepped back from the trough like it had touched a snake. A child woke at midnight and told a plain lie to a tired mother about tapping under the floorboards, and then told the truth when the tapping came again. Out on the old toll road, a wagon had vanished between the cottonwoods without leaving a broken spoke. At noon, the windmill turned when there was no wind. At dusk, the bell rope was tied as always to keep the clapper from gossiping. In that hush, the red lantern took up its post on the mesa and did not waver. The rider came in from the Badlands at sundown with dust in the coat seams and a way of sitting a saddle that made horses trust fences less. The badge stood on the porch steps with a wire in one hand and the other hand on the rail, in the way of a man who knows a choice is coming and would rather fight a man than a choice. The rider read the wire without reading the letters and looked past the badge to the line where the mesa cut the sky. Two men said nothing. The bell rope moved once, a soft thud like a heart that notices a thing it cannot name. Both looked at the rope. Both pretended they had not. At the far edge of town, the old tracker spat in the dust and watched it soak into ground that did not want to be bothered. He spoke about Ash Mesa like one would speak of a long-dead cousin that once leaned in a doorway with pockets full of trouble. He said that a crossing up there had been moved, and then moved again, and then moved under, and that men with maps had built a toll booth on rock that had never asked for such a thing. He said that a rope had held a gate there, and that rope had seen too much of the wrong kind of weight. He said that when wind gets caught in wire, it sings a tune, and sometimes the earth tries to sing it back without knowing what the words mean. After dark, the healer stood in the clinic doorway and listened to the street. There are kinds of quiet that help, and kinds that warn. This was the kind that made wood find new ways to creak. From the mill, a thin grind rose and stopped and rose again with no men on the floor to pull levers. A door up the lane opened and stayed that way, and nobody stepped out to pull it too. The red lantern on the mesa steadied itself as if braced by a hand none of them owned. When it flared the smallest degree brighter, a cold slipped across the town that did not come from air. The badge went to the bell rope and checked the knot. It held. The rope lifted anyway by a thumb width and dropped with a quiet that felt like a word whispered into a hat so no one else could hear. They met at the table in the back room of the clinic because wood and cloth make courage easier to handle. The badge laid out the wire. It came from the next town north and said that 3 riders had not reached their beds the night before, and that a storehouse door had been found open and full, which was wrong in a way that mattered. It said that a light had been seen steady along the ridge where men do not camp. The rider listened and watched the healer count gauze, then counted with her in the way of a man who knows that order can keep a fright from finding a deep place to root. The tracker unfolded a map nobody had drawn and pointed with a thin finger to the black line that was not ink, but memory. The toll booth had stood here. The bridge had hung here. The river had run here when it ran strong enough to need a bridge. And the rope had hung there, and men had watched it for the sign that meant a head down and a day done. A list had been read there. The tracker did not say those words. He did not need to. They set rules the way people set pots to a steady boil. No one to cross the flats after dusk unless tied to a rope that ran back to a porch post. No one to look straight into the red lantern if it rose above the horizon. Salt laid at thresholds. Iron hung low over doors. The bell rope tied twice instead of once. Lamps shaded with cloth to keep light narrow, because wide light gives itself away. The stable boy wrapped wheel rims and set a sled under the rear axle of the old cart, so it could move without telling. The blacksmith gathered horseshoes with the nail holes torn and strung them on a wire across the lane, because broken iron makes a music that bad things do not step to if they can help it. The healer placed a bowl of clean water on the table and said that if it went slick, she would throw the lot into the street and start over, and so would everyone else if they wanted to see morning. On the second night, the wind arrived late and wrong. It came down off the mesa in a steady line like a saw working on a bone. It carried the smell of hot stone and old rope and something sweet that had no business in it. The bell rope shifted. The knot held. The clapper swung and struck the side once, no more, the way a man taps a glass when he wants a room to stop and look. The rider looked up Ash Mesa and saw the red lantern blink, not the flutter of flame. A blink, as if a lid closed and opened over it. Horses in the pen made a low sound that belongs to wolves and sickness. The healer counted the breaths between bell and blink and smoothed the blanket on the sleeping child on the cot, and in the space where her hand lifted, she felt a chill rise from the boards like something under the floor had exhaled. The badge took the coil of rope and tied it to his waist and to the rider belt and to the tracker, and they moved in the line that is the only way to cross a space that wants to swallow the unwary. They went down the lane, past doors that opened a finger width and then shut because doors are how fear keeps count. They passed the mill, where the flywheel turned slow with no hand on a lever. They reached the toll road where dust had been packed by years of feet and hooves and fear. The cottonwoods on either side held their leaves tight like fists. Beyond them, the black shelf of Ash Mesa waited with the red lantern steady and patient. In the trees, the air cooled. The men stood a breath apart and let eyes learn shapes. The old toll booth sat to the right of the road. Roof caved in, counter smashed, a ledger board nailed to the inside wall with no marks on it anymore. The rope groove in the lintel cut a line so deep a person could set a finger in it and not see the nail. The tracker set a palm to the wood and flinched as if it had burned. He said a soft thing that might have been a name if names had been allowed there. The rider eased along the ditch where wheel ruts had become a kind of riverbed, and felt with the sole of a boot for the hollow place that a person should not step if he wanted the ground to hold all night. The rope on their waists tugged. It was not wind. It was the line itself going tight as if something had leaned on it and let its weight travel. The badge braced his legs and took that weight and gave it back. The rider slid his hand down the rope and found the twang that belongs to a thing that has been plucked by a finger that cannot be seen. The red lantern blinked again. The bell far back in town did not move. The wind stilled all at once as if a mouth had closed. A whisper came then, not through air, but through wood. The booth spoke, not words in any full sense. The sound of pages turned, the sound of a pen tip scratching, the sound of a hand tapping the counter for a coin that was not there. The rider leaned close until his breath fogged a pane that had never been glass. Only longing. In that fog a shape formed, the negative of a head bent over the counter, and a hand under the fog that had no bones in it, only nails. The nails lay in a row like a spine. They clicked once against the counter, and the counter gave back the little echo of debt. Behind them, the rope line twitched. The tracker turned fast and saw a figure the height of a man and the width of a winter-starved mule standing in the road without shoulders. It wore powder for skin and moved in the windless air the way a cut of cloth moves when you rub it between fingers. Its face was a place where dust forgot how to settle. In the center of that forgetting, a small coal burned, not red, not orange, something older than both. Iron lifted in the rider hand. Iron spoke. Sound meant nothing. The coal brightened, not because of iron, but because of attention. The badge stopped breathing for a count of 4, and then forced breath into the chest, because breath is the oldest argument a man has. He took the coil and made a loop and let it fall and lift on the road, and when it came back again, it came heavier. The loop went again and a third time, and then he threw because a choice cannot be held like a coin forever. The rope found the shape. The shape became softer but did not leave. The coal did not change. The toll booth ledger whispered pages with no numbers. The red lantern did not move. Back in town, the healer drew a line of salt on the threshold of the clinic, and placed next to it a horseshoe broken in two, then turned to the child and to the woman in the chair and spoke about bread and coffee and the little blue patch of sky that sometimes holds through a storm as if it knows something. Other bits of sky do not. She listened for the bell without turning her head. When a tiny breath of air lifted the hair on her arm, she went to the window and saw that the lamp flame leaned east to west with no draft in the room. She took the lamp, covered it with a hand, and the flame straightened as if it had been told to behave. Beneath her feet, the board sighed like a person who has held a secret too long. Out on the ode, the figure made of dust and nail clicked once and walked toward the booth without moving legs. It was on the left of the road, and then it was on the right because the places between do not belong to the walking. The badge backed to the post where the toll rope had once hung and set his shoulders to wood that had seen men lean for other reasons. The tracker lifted a canteen and threw a sheet of water across the road. The water arced and broke into beads and fell and rolled. Where it rolled, the dust shape thinned as if thirsted. The rider flicked a handful of salt and iron filings into the air, and the filings stuck to the dust as if grease lived in it. It hissed a little, like a hand touched a stove by mistake. The whisper grew into a line of sense then, words rubbed down to nubs by long use and little care. Toll due, tally up, ledger against ledger. The rider put a palm flat on the counter and felt cold come up his arm into bone, and then beyond bone to the part of a man that does not wear out at the same pace. He took his hand back and flexed fingers to make sure they were still his. The badge said a slow thing about roads and rights. The toll booth did not care. The voice that lived in boards asked again for the coin that would not show. The red lantern blinked for the third time, longer now, the way an eye closes when grit insists. The ground under the old rope groove shifted. It lifted a breath and settled a breath. The rider felt a shiver run through the post and into the earth and then down the road into town. Doors rattled. The mill wheel turned a quarter circle. In the clinic, the healer set a hand on the table to steady the cup, and the cup rang against wood in a note that did not belong to clay. Far up on the mesa, the red lantern seemed nearer, as if the mesa itself had shortened between heartbeats. They fell back to the cottonwoods and tied the rope to a trunk and shifted their weight into it, and watched the booth shake itself like a dog free of water. In the branches above them, things moved that were not leaves. They moved in lines like typeset on a press. They formed a row and then broke it, and then formed another. It was not birds. It was the absence of birds finding a way to make itself seeable. When the rider looked straight at it, it left. When he looked away, it returned and crept closer to the place where rope touched bark. The tracker spoke then about the last time a rope on this road had been asked to hold more than a gate. He spoke about a body that had swung when there was no wind, and a crowd that had felt tall while it watched and then felt small for years afterward, until it forgot how to name the feeling. He spoke about a ledger grease that had soaked the booth counter, and the way grease never washes from wood no matter how much sand you rub it with. He said a bone was under the post because men had not wanted to carry it far in the dark. He said the post remembered. They dug with the heel of a boot and with a broken pick and with hands when the ground asked for that. 3 inches down, the dirt changed to the color of the inside of a mouth. 6 inches down, the pick rang like it had found a pan. 9 inches down, a small white line showed, and then another. The badge stopped and looked at the rider and did not have to say a thing. They took the bones out and set them in a line without naming them. The dust shape drifted closer and tilted like a dog, which cannot see the trick you are showing. The ledger whispered. The red lantern blinked longer and brighter, and then held steady in a way that meant it was waiting for its own part. The healer came down the road with a bundle in her arms and a lamp with a hood that showed only a ribbon of light. She set the bundle on the ground and unfolded it. Inside lay a length of cloth, a broken spoon, a scrap of rope, a piece of wood that had once been the rung of a stool, and a coin with a hole in it. She said that when people cannot pay the debt they owe, they sometimes pay with small things that hold big quiet. She said a thing about truth being a weight you can carry a mile as long as 2 hands hold it. She took the coin and set it on the counter. The counter shivered, but did not accept it. She took the broken spoon and set it beside the coin. The counter sighed a little, She laid the scrap of rope there and the rung piece and the cloth last. The whisper changed. Not a full word, the shape of one. The rider gathered the bones and crossed the road to the place where a shallow place had held a foot, when there was still water to hold feet. He set the bones there and washed them with his hands, like a man washes the dust from a friend who has been a long time gone. He spoke to the water that was not there, and the water remembered enough of itself to answer with cold in his palms. He carried the bones back and set them at the base of the post, in a way that made the post straighten the smallest amount. The dust shape moved nearer and then nearer again, and became thinner where the iron filings had stuck, and become thicker where the rope line cut it in half. The badge lifted the bell rope knot and did not untie it. He wrapped his hand around the clapper up inside, where only a small hand fits, and pulled once. The bell answered in the low voice it uses when it is asked to speak truth to a knight that wants to lie. The red lantern flared as if satisfied that a part had been read correctly. The booth voice whispered a last soft tally, and the pages made a sound like cloth folding. The dust shape flickered and broke into curls that the iron filings held for a count, and then let go of because nothing holds a thing not made to be held beyond the moment when holding does what holding is supposed to do. The wind came then, honest wind, from west to east with the smell of dry sage and the far wet of a place that had seen rain. The rope line slackened in their hands. The leaves moved and sounded like leaves. The booth sat as it had sat at every dusk since men built it, but smaller, like a shirt worn thin finely toward rags. Far up on the mesa, the red lantern dimmed to a coal and then a pin, and then nothing, as if the hand that held it had got tired and let night carry it away. They did not cheer. Cheering is for rooms with music. They worked. They set the bones in the ground away from the post and away from the road, and they did not mark the place with a stone, because stones can teach the wrong lessons when men come with shovels in little time. The badge stood by while the rider tamped the soil, and the tracker laid a branch over it, and the healer pressed her palm there for a count of 10 that matched the count of a newborn lung. They stood and looked at the booth and the post and the rope, and said a little while would be needed before anything that had learned a habit would let it go. In town, the mill wheel stopped turning on its own. The windmill creaked when the wind touched it and did not move when the wind left it. The lamp in the clinic burned straight. The tied bell rope hung true and heavy and uninterested in games. Horses put their heads down and took breath deep enough to tell their own hearts that morning would come, when morning always comes. Someone at the back of the livery began to sing, and then coughed because singing is a thing you have to practice after a spell of not having any use for it. At dawn, Ash Mesa looked like rock again. It was still wrong in the way of old volcanic bones that hold heat and grudges, but it did not hold a light. Coyotes returned to their trade. A hawk rode a line of air like a letter written to no one. The badge took the rope from his waist and laid it coiled on the booth floor. The rider lifted the ledger board off its nail and set it outside to let the sun read it. The sun read nothing and warmed it anyway, because that is the only way the sun knows. The tracker walked the road all the way to the cottonwoods and back, watching the dust for the sign of backward feet or a mark where something had stepped without toes. He found animal and man and the scrape of a branch dragged without hurry. He did not find the shape of what had stood in the road like an empty coat full of cold. The healer boiled the water in the clinic and tasted it with the tip of the tongue and nodded. It was not sweet and never would be. It was not wrong the way it had been. She made coffee and lied again that it was fine. The child on the cot woke and asked for the first thing that came to a child's mind when fear lifts a corner of its hand. The healer gave that thing and watched the way small eyes look at a room, as if it had been replaced in the night by one that looks the same but does not want to bite. 3 nights later, the bell moved once. The rope did not twitch. The clapper did not strike. The bell itself shifted in its yoke a finger width and then settled as if shoulders could be shrugged by bronze. The rider went down the toll road and stood by the booth and did nothing at all for a time that could be counted but should not be. The booth smelled like wood that had drunk river long ago. He set the ledger board back on its nail inside. He did not say a word. He left as light grew, and shadows stepped into their spaces and stayed there like decent things. A week passed. The red lantern did not show. Men walked late when they had to and tied ropes to belts because rules are how luck is taught to respect a place. A boy dared another boy to look into the cottonwoods and find the counter with his name carved in it. Neither went. Across the flats on the side of the mesa, a small rockfall came down with a sound like gravel being fed to a stove. When people turned to look, nothing showed but dust, as ordinary as Sunday. In the office, the badge unfolded the wire and read it for the first time with eyes, and found that it had said very little at all, and he folded it again and put it under a paperweight that had once been a broken hinge. Summer moved toward heat. The creek found a low voice that fit its size and did not overreach. The wind stood up when called and lay down when told. The toll booth sat and grew smaller in the eye, with each pass a person made without it asking for anything. The nail spine the rider had seen only in fog stayed under the counter where nails belong, heads proud, points true. A row of iron too neat to have been made by hands in a hurry. No one touched it. Some things you leave where they learned to be. On a night when stars felt near enough to make a person duck, the healer hung a lantern in the window and turned the flame down so it would not scare off sleep. The rider stood in the walkway and watched the play of that low light on the road. Far off in the trees there came the soft sound of a rope sliding in a groove, and then the even softer end of that sound when rope finds no weight on it. It was not the bell rope. It was the toll rope in a place where no rope hangs. The rider put his hand to the post by the door and felt nothing at all. Sometimes nothing is the best a day can offer and the right thing to bear. Before autumn, the badge took a plank and nailed it to a post at the head of the road. He painted letters on it in a hand that knew how to spell and how to be plain. Cross by day, tie at dusk. Do not look back if you hear your name. He did not write names. There are places where names invite a thing to step close. People read the plank and nodded and walked on. The plank did not stop fools. Fools are a river you cannot dam. It reminded the rest, which is all a plank can do. One late afternoon, a wind rose from the north with a smell of far snow. Dust wrote lines on the road that looked like script from a book nobody in town could read. On Ash Mesa, a small red light appeared, and then went out, as if someone under the ground had learned how to make a lamp and had not yet learned how to keep oil from drowning the wick. The rider watched without fear, and without the pride that thinks it has tamed a place. He went to the booth and stood, and then lifted the ledger board down and used it to prop open the door, while he swept mouse droppings into a pan. He put the board back and left the door open. The evening walked in and out through that opening as it pleased, and nothing used the door that did not have a right. When winter came, snow found the toll road the way debt finds men who think they can hide under new hats. The bridge that was not a bridge showed itself where drifts lay, as if a hand had turned the land down a degree. The booth shed its roof to wait without a protest and became a table for boys to set their tin soldiers on for a war that made less noise than the last one had. The bell rope was tied and untied as needed and did not cause talk anymore. When it moved, and when it rested, it did not pretend it heard old orders. On a night that belonged to no season, under a sky that had lost its mind for a breath, the rider saddled the plain horse and tightened the cinch and set a hand on the withers and felt the heat that stands between bone and hide like a promise you can lean against when the wind turns. He looked toward Ash Mesa and saw darkness as dark should be. He looked to the clinic and saw a low lantern and the curve of a shoulder and heard a kettle lift its lid by half and set it back down. He looked to the bell and saw rope, and beyond rope the idea of a weight that no longer asked to be noticed every time a knight wanted company. He rode out by the creek and let the horse drink. The water pulled at the moon and let it go. He turned along the cottonwoods and paused by the booth and thought of ledgers burned and ropes cut and bones carried and pages whispered and tolls paid and not paid and paid again in quieter coin. Then he moved on because moving on is what he was built for, and because a town that has learned to set its own rules for the dark does not ask a man to sit and wait for the next bad hour. The horse took the road like a sentence that has learned to end itself without a flourish. The rider let the reins hang and watched the horizon think about morning. Sometimes in that valley, in the hour when dust lets go of boots and settles, people hear a small sound from the road. Not the bell, not the wind. A page turned when no hand holds it. A rope sliding without weight. A coin laid on a board and carried off by no pocket. When they hear it, they look at the rules on the plank, and they tie a rope to their belt if they must go, and they step with their weight ready to share with anything that needs it. They do not look back. They do not call names. They do not set lamps high on windowsills at night unless a child is lost, and then the lamps rise like a choir and the mesa itself, for a breath, looks like a holy place. In spring, the creek ran honest and cold for a few weeks, and then remembered it lived in a hard land. The booth sank a finger width into the ground and became more stump than house. The broken horseshoe wire sagged and was pulled taut again by a hand that would not sign its work. The plank at the head of the road weathered, and the letters blurred, and the badge painted them once more. And the second time the letters were better, because practice makes even warning kind. The clinic window kept a lamp in it at dusk, low and steady. Not a sign for the dead, but a promise to the living that someone inside had bandages and a will. If a rider ever came along who had not lived the Red Lantern night and asked why the rope coil sat under the counter, and why coins with holes were nailed to the wall, the stable boy would tell a story that did not use names. If that rider laughed, the boy would not argue. He would hand him the coil and point him to the toll road, and tell him to be back before dark if he wanted to see the same town twice. Most riders returned with a different shape to the eyes, and a little less room in the mouth for jokes. Those who did not, the town did not talk about. The land takes things and gives back others. People stay alive by counting the gifts and setting the taking in places where it does not poison the well. Now and then, near winter, someone says they saw a red glow on Ash Mesa, and someone else says it was the sunset, and someone else says it was a campfire, and someone else says it was the eye of a coal left after the fire was out, and someone else says it was nothing at all, and they all go on with what their hands were doing. The bell rope hangs and swings when wind asks, and stays quiet when the living have earned their sleep. And if a night comes when wood whispers like paper again, and the booth hums like wire again, and the road says toll due, tally up, the town will do as it did. It will bring bones to the place that asks. It will lay little things with big quiet on a board that knows their weight. It will let iron sing and salt hold and rope tell men where they stand relative to one another. It will not bargain with a light that thinks itself a star. It will not look back when it hears a name and a voice that remembers how you once said yes. Under all that, the ground keeps its own ledger. It does not write in ink. It writes in habits, and in the tilt of fences, and in the way hooves punch when a horse does not want to go where a hand tells it. The ground remembered the first Red Lantern. It remembered the last one. It remembered a rope hung for gates that learned other work, and how that work ended. It remembered a bridge that did not belong and a river that took it back decently. It remembered a booth that asked for coin and became a mouth for a hunger that had little to do with money, and more to do with a kind of counting that makes men smaller. The ground is patient. It waits for men to stop pretending and start balancing. That is the real toll, pay it, and the bell will swing only when called. Refuse it, and a light far off that should not be there will go steady and wait all night for you to look up.